The Devil Likes Idle Hands by Kieran Laverty. The Winslow tradition upon the turning of their sons' 18th years was to take them on a hunting trip. Howard and Wesley Winslow were cousins, but often counted by their family as twins, for they both shared a birthday on the 18th of December. As such, the giving of gifts at Christmas had been neglected all their lives in favour of conjoining the dates. And so, on the 24th of December, they arrived with their fathers and their uncle in the foothills of the Black Forest along the French-German border, after 3 days of travelling across land and sea from Derbyshire to Southampton, to Calais, and finally to Strasbourg. The boys were dressed in clothes their fathers had gotten tailor-made the week beforehand, and each had their own rifles to boot. They both plucked at their collars and loosened their belts as they strained to help their fathers pitch the tents. They would look to their Uncle Michael and see him with his shirt unbuttoned at the nape, and his trousers held up by braces. His tent was not only pitched, but stocked with bedroll and lantern before they had even gotten the tent poles secure. Night was fast descending on the place by the time Howard and Wesley had their tents pitched. Michael had gotten the fire built and a pot of water was whistling at the boil as he cracked open a tin of biscuits. They were sat, slugging down cup after cup of rich tea, and before long night had fallen, and talk had turned to festive matters. Each man outlined his perfect Christmas roast, and the boys eyed the sacks that they had hauled over from Strasbourg, which contained the accoutrements for a proper Christmas feast, which was to be made full by the killing of a buck. "How d'ye tell a buck from a doe?" asked Howard. His education had been in the fields of economics and law, and so naturalism had evaded him. Part of the reason for the hunt was to accustom Winslow boys to the outdoors, for they spent much of their early lives cooped up in cavernous country estates and dusty boarding schools. "A buck's got big antlers," Uncle Michael said as he puffed on a pipe, "and if they're in a rut, they'll make a sound like this." He cupped his hands to his mouth and made a sound like a broken bugle, the tone gargling at the back of his throat. The boys laughed along with their uncle, but their fathers scowled. "Mind you don't end up calling one here," said Howard's father, James. "They'll likely raid the veg from the sack if they do," said Wesley's father, Curtis. "I'll hang it from a tree, if you'd prefer, like Krampus does the naughty kids," Michael offered. He got to his feet and beckoned for the boys to follow him. They went and set about helping him hoist the sacks onto some middling branches. "What's a Krampus?" Wesley asked, as he tossed his jacket aside and unfastened his collar. Like his cousin, Wesley had been educated in English matters, and knew little of anything beyond the Channel or the North Sea. "Just a legend here on the continent. Rather than giving a bad kid a lump of coal, the Huns reckoned it'd be better if they were stolen in the night by a demon, and then hung from a tree in a sack and whipped with rods." "Wicked bastards," Howard scoffed. "Got to be, to think something as vile as that up at Christmas time. Perhaps they didn't make it up then. You'll say you still believe in Santa next. You best hope you qualify as an adult. Else Krampus is going to redden your ass with a twig, you dirty wanker." "Don't call me that." "Oi, quit your bloody squabbling, and let's get these sacks up." Michael's tone had changed, and it spurred the boys into silent working, much to the admiration of their fathers. They reclined by the tents and discussed more civil matters as the sun's light finally vanished, and the fire lit the camp in solitude. The boys were tentative thereafter, not speaking much to each other. The sacks secure, they sat and told stories. The elder three told of past hunting trips, and the youngest two spoke of their antics at boarding school. At the midnight hour they wished each other a Merry Christmas before all retiring to their tents. Michael put out the fire as the boys changed into their bedclothes, relieved at the release from the tweed and cotton trappings which had scorned them all day. "I'd best not hear you muttering Sadie Cunningham's name in the night," Wesley chided as he dimmed the lamp. "Piss off. It was Kiki Harrington that started that rumour, and I gave them a good beating for it." "You beat something, all right." Howard struck Wesley across the face with a pillow, and after a scuffle of bent limbs and strained muscles, they settled back down, exhausted. The two lay with their backs to one another. As their consciousness waned, they each heard a sound from further up the mountains. It was much like the bugle call their uncle had made, only of a more animalistic tone. And so they each fell into sleep, with thoughts of a successful hunt and a feast on the morrow. Howard awoke, not all at once, but in pieces. Some persistent sound had roused him. It was like a dog's nose nuzzling at the earth. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Wesley's bed was empty. This realization brought him upright, and he thought perhaps that his cousin was suffering of a weak bladder from all the tea they had drunk. He looked out toward the open flap of the tent, and then sat, frozen. Illumined by the moon and the dull embers of the fire was an animal shape among the trees. Fur bristled along the edges of the shadowy form, and two prongs jutted from atop its head. Howard cast all thought of Wesley from his mind, and instead reached for the rifle at the foot of his bedroll. The thing was by the tree, which bore the sacks of veg and stuffing, and as Howard crept out, rifle cocked, he thought he could see one of the sacks on the ground, and the thing was rummaging at it with hooves and mouth alike. He brought the gun to his shoulder, but when he clicked the hammer, the very air seemed to freeze. The thing turned its head like an owl hearing a mouse, and Howard's trembling finger rubbed at the trigger as the thing reared up to its full height, standing on two legs. It let out a terrible bugle call. Howard lowered the rifle. "Very funny, Uncle Michael," he shrugged. "Wes pissin' out there, is he?" Michael did not respond, but he did appear from within his tent, with a look of abject horror on his freshly wakened face, and a knife in his hand. Seeing his uncle, Howard looked back to the creature by the tree. It loomed into full view from beneath the shade of the canopy. It had a face like a goat, and its legs ended in cloven hooves. In one hand it held a rod of birch wood, and in the other was a sack that squirmed with frightened life. It dropped them both as it charged, roaring again as it had before, and before Howard could raise his rifle to meet the thing, Michael had tackled it with his knife. Howard watched as his uncle struggled with the creature, the barrel of his gun still trailing the fight until Michael was tossed away and winded by a tree trunk. The ruckus had stirred James and Curtis, who appeared as disembodied heads at the flap of their tent, bedcaps askew. The hairy giant loped toward Howard again, its arms outstretched with fingers tipped by talons, but then a deafening blast pealed through the cold winter air, and the thing fell writhing to the ground. It let out a few spasmodic motions before falling still. All the men gathered around where the thing had dropped its sack. A muffled voice cried from within, pleading for release. Michael cut the sack open, and sure enough, out tumbled Wesley. His eyes were puffy with tears, and his lips chattered with panic. He leaped into his father's arms and sobbed for a while, all the time apologizing for chiding his cousin. Inspection of the body within the camp drew them all to the conclusion that Wesley had fallen victim to the Krampus. Despite his stupor and the horror of the ordeal, Howard thought how funny it would have been to let the demon have his way. It might have spared them all a restless night, and given him a good laugh in the process.